Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I know that everyone's time and all of that is really precious, and I just hope that you can walk away from this with some, really concrete examples and some concrete ideas as to how to embark on, a holistic media measurement journey. So just to introduce ourselves, my name is Nicola. I'm the Sales and Marketing Manager here at Ruepoint. And my colleague Susan Ryan is joining us today. She's the head of Insight here at Ruepoint. She works with a host of different clients from a variety of different industries, ranging from, banking to retail. Sue, what other industries? Utilities. You kind of dabble in a whole bunch.
Yeah.
Insurance as well.
Yeah.
So Susan's going to be speaking, on behalf of kind of, pulling from her examples and her experience working with a whole range of different clients over the years, and kind of explaining what are kind of some of the core pieces that we need to be taking into account when we start on a measurement journey. So before we kind of kick off, I've launched some polls in the background. So as we go through this webinar, it shouldn't take longer than half an hour for the content and then 15 minutes at the end for some Q&A. So I've launched 2 questions in the background. I can already see someone's answered. Fantastic. So the first question is, how often do you report to senior management? And then the other question is, do you feel that your current media measurement gives you valuable insights? So I'm going to, I've already jumped ahead. There are our faces if you can't see them. I'm Nicola, and there's my colleague Susan. So to start with, what we're going to do is we're going to be discussing kind of best practice for media measurement.
Nicola, sorry, I don't know. For me, I'm still seeing the poll. I don't know if everybody else is, or we're supposed to.
Why don't I try and just reshare my screen?
Yeah. It might have just froze on that for me.
Yeah, exactly. So Sue, what can you see now?
Yeah, all good now.
Perfect. Okay, great. So to start with, we're going to be just discussing best practice. So, there are some ideas and, some things that we absolutely need to take into account when we're starting to report. So first of all, I want to talk about AMIC. So AMIC is an organization, it's a global organization that kind of oversees media measurement and evaluation. Ruepoint are members of AMIC, and our COO is actually on the board of AMIC. And it's something that we really, really believe in. And we really believe in, what framework and kind of the best practice ideals that AMIC sets forward. So AMIC basically provides us with kind of the gold standard of measurement metrics, the do's and the don'ts, and, what can we do to make sure that we get the most out of our measurement? Because at the end of the day, it's all great to measure something, but if you're not walking away with actual ideas and strategy and a perception of where you are, then, your measurement isn't really working for you. So there are the Barcelona principles, and there are several of them, but we're going to kind of be talking about 3 very specific ones today. So the first one is around goal setting. And goal setting is vital. And this, incorporates setting realistic and achievable goals. You need to have an understanding of where you are in present in order to understand what your goals are in future. So by this, I mean, looking at the past, looking at your present, measuring and in the moment to be able to take that measurement and utilize it to set more realistic goals. So can you take us through vanity metrics, please?
Yeah, so I think, and just kind of to add on, I guess, with the goal setting, just in terms of making sure they align with your communication strategy and then the wider organization objectives as well. So as Nicola said, you have to make sure the report is working for you. So I think that's a really kind of important one to focus on first. And then vanity metrics, I guess, is something that we're probably in the industry trying to move away from. The most obvious one is AVE, which is media cost. So it's just, it's not regarded as a reliable metric. There's no evidence around it. Obviously, sometimes we understand clients want to put a value on something, but kind of from our point of view, we're really trying to move away from that and kind of move on to that last point there, which is incorporating qualitative analysis into your assessment. So also still looking at quantitative metrics, which is your volume and things like your media source breakdown and that kind of thing, but adding that context by looking as well at those qualitative metrics. So you want to look at not just your volume of coverage, but what's behind it, what's driving the content. You know, you want to look at things like the tone of the coverage and prominence, and that will really add that context to just, you know, besides looking at those quantitative metrics. So I guess that's where the shift is at the moment. We're trying to move away from those, what we'd call vanity metrics, and focus more on the qualitative, which are measurable and reliable results.
Absolutely, absolutely. So looking at the quality of your coverage, not just, you know, the quantity, the volume. So first principles, where do you start? So we chatted about setting goals. And what's really important with setting those goals is taking a look at the wider business. What are the business objectives? That might be a growth strategy. It might be something to, you know, enter a new market, something like that. What are the business objectives? And then tying that in to the internal communications objectives. So your business objectives and your communication objectives are always going to be aligned. And so those are really, really important, so that your PR strategy, your comms strategy, all of that can actually be supportive of the business objectives. And to align with all of that, we need to make sure that what we're measuring makes sense and ties into that. You know, for example, there's no point in measuring something that was actually an objective 2 years ago. You need to keep things up to date and relevant so that you can draw the most insightful pieces from your analysis. The next point is to both incorporate quantitative and qualitative metrics, and then to assess. So, you know, our recommendation would be to use a third-party analysis piece for some form of your measurement journey, so that, you know, what the measurement piece that's coming out is objective, and that it can be done, you know, timeously and quickly. We all know that the PR professionals, comms professionals out there, you're expected to do more and more each year with less and less budget and less and less time. So, you know, this is something definitely to consider outsourcing. So if you've got an objective eye and something that can be done really, really quickly, and that it frees you up to, you know, focus on implementing the insights and implementing the strategy. And the last thing to kind of take into account when you first start out on, you know, a measurement piece is to benchmark. And that incorporates two pieces. So, you know, you want to benchmark against previous periods, whether that be the previous quarter or the previous year, however, you know, what your reporting allows for and what your budget allows for as well. And that might take the form as you start as a landscape kind of historical piece. So that might look at, you know, we're in 2023 now, we're all starting to plan and budget and strategize for 2024. So if we're talking about benchmarking, it might be now a good idea to look at your 2023 media coverage holistically and look at it as a whole, so that, you know, come January, February, you can be setting realistic goals, updating your strategy, and kind of setting those benchmarks for which to compare yourself against next year. So the first one would be you should benchmark against previous periods. You need to have that context. You need to understand where you're coming from in order to know where you're going, but also to benchmark against competitors and peers. And that might be, you know, one specific competitor, or it might be, you know, 5 or 6 competitors. But it's really important to see what your competitors are doing in the media, where they're having their successes, and you know, what you might learn from what they're doing in the media, what works and what isn't working in the industry. So to start with, what we're going to do is we're going to go through several sort of examples from different industries as to how you might look to showcase some of your results. What are some of the metrics that you might want to be incorporating? What ones are important? And what ones, you know, kind of can really, really provide great insight, looking at all of those first principles that we've just discussed. So what we know is that we want to incorporate both quantitative and qualitative. So I'm going to hand over to Susan now so that she can talk us through some of these measurement metrics and explain, you know, the importance of them.
Yeah, so this is kind of a typical example, I guess, of probably what most of our reports start with, this headline results slide. And this one is from Client and Utilities. And as Nicola said, it breaks down by quantitative and qualitative. So I guess just looking at the quantitative results first. So obviously you've got your volume. You can see there's over 600 pieces of content for this particular client in this period. Broken then further than the charts on the bottom, volume by media type. So you can see where you're getting the most amount of coverage coming through. Further again, then on the chart on the right, you can see it broken down even further. So you've got things like regional, broadcast, national, radio, TV. So you can see exactly where your coverage is coming through. So kind of quantitatively, that's the top metrics that we look at, how much content, where is that landing? But again, to add that context, without that qualitative piece included, all you know is you've got a huge amount of coverage. You don't know what's driving it. You don't know anything behind it. Could be a really negative issue pushing up content. So without that context into that qualitative analysis, you're kind of left guessing, I guess, as to what is driving the coverage. So here you can see the charts on the right. The kind of key qualitative metrics we look at are sentiment and prominence. So in terms of sentiment, you can see there the chart, you've got your positive and negative, which I think is probably straightforward enough. Neutral is kind of that factual reportage coming through. And then balanced is a really interesting one because it's where you have that mix of positive and negative. We see it a lot in crisis management where maybe there's really negative issue. A lot of the time the client might think, oh God, it was all negative, but actually, they maybe released a statement or have a spokesperson out speaking, and they've managed to actually balance that content. So adding that into your quantitative metrics, that gives you that picture of kind of the tone of the coverage, and what the conversation drivers were within the period. Another thing to look at then is the prominence, which added in with sentiment really adds that extra layer. So you could have a huge amount of coverage, a lot of positive, but without knowing kind of the prominence of it, it could be nearly almost all passing, and not likely to resonate with a reader or a listener. So by kind of keying into that, the levels of prominence, you can see there, you can find out if it's prime. So that's where it's, headline coverage or driving the content. Significant is, we see it a lot like in industry pieces where there's like shared discussion around maybe competitors, and then passing is literally just those passing mentions. So by looking at that sentiment and prominence together, it really gives you a good idea of what's driving the content and the quality of that content as well. And then two key metrics we pull out from those specifically just to highlight, because of the importance of that prime coverage, we look at your level of prime positive and prime negative. So it's really important in terms of benchmarking. These are really key metrics that you can kind of benchmark period on period to see, are they staying steady? Has there been an increase? If there has, do you know why? Obviously, in terms of prime positive, you want to see that boosted as high as you can. And it's obviously, you want to see prime negative, then the opposite. So you want to see as little of that coming through as possible. So I think by looking at those, again, it just really gives you an indication of the quality of your content. Both of those also feed in then to what's called media score, which is another metric that is ideal in terms of benchmarking. It's one figure. It's a score out of 100. It's where it's just a calculation based on your more prominent content, and based on sentiment, then this calculation is done to give you your score. So you can see here in this example, the score is 80 out of 100, which is a really, really strong score. We'd be going back to a client saying, this is really, really good performance, boosted by prime positive and the fact that there is very little prime negative coming through. And I guess for me, media score is just, it's, I always say to clients, if you're just kind of looking really quick overview of what's happening, looking at that score just kind of tells you immediately, where do you land? Where was it last period? Are we staying steady, or is it heading in the right direction? So that's kind of another really good one that we would place a lot of importance on.
Absolutely. And sometimes as comms professionals, you might be reporting to senior management or board of directors, CEO, etc., who they don't really understand all of the nitty-gritty that might go into a full measurement piece on your media coverage. And so a metric or a measurement such as media score, which is a score out of 100, and so it's similar to an exam mark, so 50 being a pass, the closer to 100 the better. And so that's something that everyone understands, and it's really, really easy to say to somebody, okay, well actually there was a crisis this quarter, our media score was 45 out of 100. Not great. Let's see if we can boost that. Let's set a target of 55 out of 100 for next quarter. And then you can track that quarter on quarter, month on month, or however you report. And that's a really great way to measure is your strategy working? Is this pulling through what we were hoping to pull through? And the same is true for prime positive and prime negative. Great to be able to track period on period, their percentages. Everyone kind of understands that. And so those are really, really great ideas to be incorporating if you're reporting to somebody who maybe doesn't understand the full piece. We were talking about benchmarking. And so Sue, I'm going to ask you to kind of talk again here we're talking about period on period benchmarking. So I'm going to hand it to you.
I think, the thing with obviously you get an analysis, you get one report. I mean, it's great, it tells you where you're at that moment, but I think, you really need to incorporate consistent, continuous reporting to get the full value. And how often you do that will just depend on your organization, and just again, kind of how often, as Nicola asked in the poll at the start, how often do you report internally? For some people that could be monthly. As you can see here, we've got the trending in the chart on the top, volume by month across the periods. But for this particular client, which is a not-for-profit client, they just take out the 2 reports a year. So literally here they're benchmarking the H1 against the H2. And this will change, and you can benchmark any period against, whatever it is relevant for you. The important thing you're looking for is what trends are coming through in that. So, are you seeing particular months where there's high level of positive? Could be, linked back. You could see with this client here, really busy time for them, in H1 and H2 across different months. This is most likely different campaigns coming through. So you want to be able to tie back your results and kind of know if that makes sense in terms of what your strategy was for that period. But I think, having a standalone piece of analysis on its own just isn't going to give you the true value. So, we would always recommend whatever period suits you, but just try and get into that habit of that continuous reportage, and you'll be able to benchmark them, whether it's month on month or year on year. It just really, really adds that value. And as Nicola said, you can see if there's a score going down, you kind of know, and you want to look into what's happening there. And again, use that going forward. So just track as much as you can, and just take those results that you get then and use those for your strategy going forward. And it really will add that value then to the fuller piece.
Yeah, having a holistic piece is just going to be great, and to be able to do this on a regular basis. Budget might only allow for something like this to be done on an annual basis, but that's still immensely valuable. So here we've got a breakdown, of the different media types.
Yeah, I think this probably ties into that kind of conversation around maybe just looking at a sample of coverage as well. So for this particular slide here, it's really similar to what we looked at on the first one for those headline results, but it's broken down. It's a client in the banking industry, and it's broken down. It's really important for them to see where that coverage is landing across print, online, and broadcast in terms of volumes, sentiment, spokespeople, everything that we track at that higher level, but broken down. For this particular client, we look at all coverage coming through, and then we break it down quite nicely for them into the 3 different media types. Some clients are interested maybe in a national versus regional kind of perspective as well, depending on what's happening. But in terms of budget and sample, obviously the ideal thing is you analyze every piece of coverage coming through and you get that bigger picture. It's not always possible, but it doesn't mean you can't add any qualitative to your report. So, look at the area that maybe is most important to you in terms of media type. So that could be national broadcast, national print, could be just looking at as a whole at that national content, or maybe you do a lot of work kind of in community based. So you want to look at those regional publications, or possibly a select kind of, few websites that we can just kind of focus on that way. So yeah, it really depends on what areas, is important to your organization. Again, tying it back to those original objectives and communication strategy, and making sure it all fits together. So there's no point in looking at national content if the majority of your volumes are kind of coming through in regional, and that's where all your spokespeople are and that kind of thing. But this is something really that I guess is going to be different for every organization. But I mean, it can be tracked in any way. And I think if you move on to the next slide, we've probably broken it down again into particular publications. So not just looking at print or broadcast, but here looking at those top publications. Again, for that not-for-profit client, they, for this particular period, had a big campaign in Clare. I was surprised to see a lot of kind of publications in that area coming through. By adding in that sentiment and prominence, you can see what they would expect if they have a campaign in that area. A lot of positive and prime coverage coming through within those particular publications. But the other benefit of this is as well, it's to kind of highlight the bad sometimes as well. Like maybe there's a certain publication you thought you got a huge amount of coverage in volume wise, but actually when you look at it, it's all neutral passing mentions. So it's not really adding anything to your, your overall impact. So by breaking it down like this, it just adds that other layer. And actually you can go another step as well and even go down to author level and pull out particular journalists. For example, you might see a trend emerging if you're doing regular reporting where a particular journalist pens quite negative articles over time, and it's something to kind of keep in mind, and see, can you maybe work on that and maybe trying to balance some of those issues. So yeah, I mean, as I said, it can be broken down anyway. It just depends on what's relevant for the client.
Absolutely. So, for PR activity, this is something that at the end of the day, it's, directly related, it's our proactive activities that you'd be doing to garner this coverage. So it's great to be able to, incorporate into a measurement to look at exactly what you're proactively putting out.
Yeah, and I think for this client, so this is again is a banking client, and it's really important for them. They were looking at PR activity, not just to look at press releases. So to look, we can look at all those things individually, but to group everything together, that for them was kind of the full impact of their PR activity. So press releases, announcements, spokespeople, research pieces, so everything kind of grouped together. And again, by adding in that qualitative element, if you look, for example, at press releases, like, there's over 1,000 pieces of coverage coming through on press releases, which you think, brilliant, job done, it's out there, got the coverage. But if you tie that back into sentiment, you can see for this particular client, there was obviously something in one of those press releases that wasn't too well received in the media, driving up that higher negative score. So it's really important to keep an eye on that as well. Prominence as well as tracked here, and you can see, as you would expect with press release and spokespeople coverage, you want to see that high level of prime coming through. So I think this is kind of just looking at it all under the bigger umbrella, and everything kind of feeds into this. But if you want to look at one of those or all of those in more detail, if you actually go to the next slide, you'll see I've just pulled out as an example for spokespeople. So this is from one of our fintech reports, and you can see, again, similar trend here. We're breaking it down by not just quantitatively by share of voice between your spokespeople, but adding in that sentiment and prominence. And spokespeople have been proven to boost the quality of your coverage. And I think that's really evident here. You can see those charts on the right-hand side, really high level of prime in the chart on the top, and a really high level of positive coverage as well coming through. And interestingly as well, the balanced in that lower sentiment chart there, those 51 pieces coming through that were balanced coverage. That's content that could have been negative, without that statement out there was obviously something in terms of some kind of issue, managing to balance that content. So again, almost as important as that positive coverage to keep a track on that. And it just adds that layer, and we can do that with press releases. We can break them down. So not only are you seeing those 1,000 pieces for press releases, we can break that down over the period into how many press releases you issued, and then show you the impact of each one as well. So we said it at the start, you can pretty much track anything, but you need to make sure it ties back into your overall objectives and what it is, that was your strategy at the time.
Absolutely. And, spokespeople, it's, as a communications professional, I know that some people really, really struggle with getting buy-in from their CEO or a potential spokesperson. It's seen as, potentially not part of their KPIs. And so they're not really motivated to have their voice out there, their face out there. But we know the value that having spokespeople, it's an incredibly valuable tool in your toolkit to be able to shift a narrative, boost your presence of, there's so many different things. And something that reporting specifically on your spokespeople, when you can go back to the person and say, look, we had this issue, you said you were interviewed on the radio about the issue, look at the impact you've had, look at the value, the quality of the coverage you're bringing through for the brand. Being able to showcase what the impact that they're directly having is going to be monumental in terms of getting buy-in from those communications from those spokespeople. And as I said, that might be the CEO, or it might be, somebody in a more regional context. But to be able to showcase to them the value of their contribution is massive.
Yeah, definitely. Key messages then is another kind of big area that we look at for a lot of our clients, and it's an area that you really should be tracking, you know, on top of looking at like topics and spokespeople. You know, key messages, it's a trickier one because you have to, you know, we've had clients come to us and they're not really sure at the beginning of the, like I just said, on that first step, they're not really sure what their key messages maybe were for that period. You can really see that grow over time then as they get that benefit from that first analysis piece, and then they're like, actually, yeah, we do have messages, this is what we want you to track. So key messages is great. You know, it just gives you a real indication, not just of your overall level of prime positive and your media score and that kind of thing, but are you really getting your, you know, your messages out there? For this client in insurance, you can see a really strong level there, 36% coverage featured a key message. So if you just looked at that kind of as a standalone, you'd think, yeah, that's really strong, really good. But again, by bringing that sentiment and prominence in, it adds to that quality. So you can see key messages are not always pushed through by proactive, positive, or balanced, you know, balancing issues and that kind of thing. There are also external stakeholders out there that can push those messages for you. And that's a real big area that you need to keep an eye on in terms of that negative content. You can see there for that key message one, you know, if you just looked at the share for it, you'd see, yep, key message one, you know, great cut through on that message. But then when you look and see that almost half of it is negative, it just kind of makes you think again as to what it is and what is pushing that message. If you've got something like trust and transparency, you can be pushing that out proactively from your comms, but you can't control what other stakeholders are doing. So you need to kind of be aware of that. And if possible, try to get on top of that and trying to balance that. So instead of that red negative coming through, you'd like to see maybe instead that balance and, you know, in terms of crisis management, to see that come through. Same with the prominence as well. So again, just something else you can track. The importance of key messages, I think, is making sure that not only they tie back to your original objectives, but also keep them relevant, keep them up to date. They literally could change overnight if something happens, if you've got a new campaign. So you just need to make sure that your analysis matches any of those changes that you do, which is easily done, you know, just to add on new messages to track.
Absolutely. And I think that reinforces a point that I wanted to make as well, Susan, is that these reports cannot be static. You might be benchmarking every quarter, but those reports need to be evolving, incorporating your new key messages, incorporating your new spokespeople, new product lines, all of that kind of stuff. You know, it can't be static. It needs to be something that's, you know, evolving and regularly updated.
Yeah.
So kind of one of our last example, you know, pieces that we're going to be looking at is competitor benchmarking. And this is something that is always really interesting to look at, because it gives you a glimpse of, you know, how you're doing in comparison to those, you know, the peers in your industry. But it also highlights, you know, potential areas where you could be looking to improve. So it might be something really, really small, but it just highlights potentially a gap in the industry that is, you know, is open to be, you know, claimed.
Yeah, I think if you can add in competitor benchmarking, it will just add kind of more value to, you know, you're looking at your own coverage, but if you add that in, it just adds more value to that piece. This example here is from retail clients. And I think like looking, you know, and I know a lot of clients just literally go straight to the competitor section. They just want to see, you know, not their own, where are we? Yeah, where do we sit? But like in this one, if you just looked at the quantitative chart on the right there, the share of voice, you know, you'd be thinking, okay, retailer B. So if I'm retailer A, I'm thinking, oh God, retailer B is killing it, got a huge amount of coverage. But then when you bring that qualitative piece in, you can see, well, actually, they did have a huge amount of coverage, but they've got the lowest in terms of competitors from prime positive and the highest level of prime negative. So without adding that in, you would be just thinking they've got everything, you know, they've got the strongest media presence, they're all over it. But actually looking at what the content is, perhaps they had a particular issue in that period, and that's actually what's driving the coverage up. So yeah, if possible, add it in. Again, may not always be possible to add it in for all coverage. So look at the areas, you know, most likely whatever area you're looking at is going to be the same of where the focus is for your competitors as well. So kind of just have a think about that. Make sure you're comparing like for like as well. But yeah, it just adds like further value if possible. I think we'd really recommend to add that in.
Absolutely. You know, you've got to, as I said earlier, you've got to look at quantity in conjunction with quality. You know, there was a client that I was working with last year, and in the initial call that we had, they said that one of their peers was kind of completely outranking them. and they were getting a lot of pressure from the board of directors to kind of change that narrative in the media and get their presence out there a lot more. And so hence they decided to take on, a full-fledged analysis piece. And within kind of the first report that we chatted to them about, they were just blown away. Why? Because they were under the impression that this competitor was completely dominating them in the industry. But when we looked at, what was actually, going into those volumes, they found out that their message was cutting through a lot more strongly than their competitors. So it's really, really great to have that context, to be able to kind of, really have a holistic understanding. And, budget it's always going to come back to budget. But one thing that's really important to remember is if you can't measure it, how are you going to motivate for budget? So we're all kind of motivating for budget coming up for 2024, September, October, it's that time of year. And if you're wanting additional budget to, for campaigns or, whatever it is, now's the time to kind of be thinking about these kinds of things. And if you're unable to measure it, you're not going to be able to motivate for it. I was at a conference last week, and it was a group of comms and marketing professionals from Dublin. And at the event, one of the speakers asked everyone who here has had a budget cut in the last 18 months for their marketing or comms spend. And half of the room put up their hand. And that to me just really reinforced that, we hear a lot about cost of living, but it's actually, it's really impacting businesses too. And so as you're wanting to motivate for budget for next year, this is something really to think about. You need to be able to measure to showcase your success. So just 5 takeaways to kind of sum up what we've been talking about. I'm just keeping an eye on the clock. I think we're doing fine. So 5 kind of things that I want you to walk away with today as kind of sticking in your head, because we've chatted about a lot of different things. So what is the perfect mix or the perfect cocktail, when creating a measurement report? So firstly, if you can, avoid vanity metrics such as AVE. This is not always possible. Some people are going to, very staunchly believe in media cost, in media AVE. It's something that I would encourage you not to rely on as your kind of core measurement piece. But if it's something you still have to incorporate because, whoever in senior management is asking for it, that's fine. But kind of move away from it and incorporate some of these other metrics that like media score that we've chatted about. Secondly, a small budget is not going to prevent you from doing a holistic media analysis. If you can only afford to benchmark yourself against one competitor, fantastic. It's giving you insights that you didn't have before. And it's something that you could grow year on year on year. It's not something that it's all or nothing. It might be, as Susan said, looking at a sample of media coverage. It might be that you only look at online media and national print. The options here are endless. Using both qualitative and qualitative metrics, it's quantity versus quality. And that's going to be a continuous debate. It's not just in our industry, but it's definitely something that I hope we've proven here the value of qualitative and how it really just adds that extra bit of context. Ensuring that your measurement aligns with what the wider business is doing, and then that gets updated on a regular basis so that your measurement isn't static. And then lastly, incorporate that benchmarking. And that's if possible, for against competitors. But I think more vitally, it's to make sure that you're tracking and comparing to past periods, so that you can really see whether your strategy is working or not. So I'm going to open up the floor to questions. But before I do that, I just want to have a look and see where we are with the poll. So if everyone can just start sharing their questions so long. I see 1 or 2 already. So yeah, how often do you report to senior management? So it seems like there's the bulk of people report monthly, which is really interesting. And then it's tied between quarterly and annually. And then kind of the smallest amount of people, only 9% of people report half yearly. That's really, really interesting. Anne, do you feel that your current media measurement gives you valuable insights? That's fantastic. 64% of people are saying yes. So that's really, really good. I'm going to end the poll. and have a look at some of these questions. Okay, great. So I can see some have come in so long. So I think the first one, Sue, I'm going to ask you to take this one. And it says, like if this person has a small budget, is there a particular media type or media, I think they're referring to the sample here. Is there a particular media sample that they should be prioritizing?
There's not a particular one. I think that's just going to change from company to company. It's just going to be, what is your organization? Where does the interest lie? So again, it's as you said, if it's senior level and they're really interested in pushing out nationally and getting that kind of brand awareness at a national level, then that's where you want to focus your sample. But if you do a lot of work in kind of community based and kind of CSO initiatives and that kind of thing, and campaign work locally, you kind of be missing out if you didn't look at regional. So you really have to think of where your interest lies, where are your spokespeople out, and just make sure that they align. Because otherwise you could automatically say, oh yeah, well, I'll just look at national, that makes sense. And it just may not give you the results. You could have no spokesperson presence, no key messages, because you're not getting the coverage picked up at that level. So yeah, I think everyone would have to look individually and see. But then, as you said, a sample can be tailored to meet whatever requirements. So that's something that I think for us, we would definitely sit and spend a bit of time working out with the client, making sure it's a good fit.
Absolutely. It's a really big decision to make. But again, looking at your comms objectives, the business objectives, that's going to really lead you in the right direction. And again, another question would be kind of, what is the most popular reporting option? And I think this question ties into, how often should these reports be, conducted or commissioned? And I think that again, that your business objectives and your communications objectives are going to tie into that. You might report frequently on a monthly basis, but then on an annual basis, you're required to do something a little bit, more thorough. Your budget is going to guide you on this, as well as, what the internal business requirements are. This is not something, if budget is a concern, this is not something that you have to do on a quarterly basis to get value out of it. If you can afford to do it, annually, because that's where you've got, resource available, you've got, colleagues have time or whatever to really assist with something like this on an annual basis, then definitely an annual basis is going to be really, really helpful. And, within that annual reporting, you could look at each quarter separately.
Yeah. You could break it down, yeah, or even by month, so you can still you still get the value of seeing it across the period as well.
Absolutely. I think those are all the questions. I think, in terms of kind of like my passing or concluding thoughts would be, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It can be a really, like, perhaps a bit of a daunting experience to kind of set something up from the get-go. You look at all of the options and you're not really, really sure what to do. I think start with one thing, build from there. Start with an annual report, say on 2023, and work your way from there. And then you can always add on as time goes on.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be all or nothing. I just want to say thank you so much to Susan for lending her time so that I could pick her brain on a few things. If you have any questions, I've popped up the kind of Ruepoint email address over there. Feel free to shout and we can pick up the conversation separately. But thank you so much. I know that these things tend to drag on a little bit, so I'm glad we finished 5 minutes earlier. Thanks again, Sue, and thank you to everyone for attending. Really, really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday afternoon.